I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about sort of being a Canadian based company in this space, because traditionally there hasn't been a lot of support. I mean, it's been a tough go, but we've had, like you said, D Wave is a great example of a huge winner in this ecosystem in Canada. So talk us through sort of what it's like being in this space now. Is it a positive because there just aren't many? Is it a negative not being one of these US companies being in their sites, or does it just not matter anymore?
So I think for investors in Kendall Square or Sand Hill Road, it doesn't matter, right? Whether you're Canadian or whether you're from Lithuania or whether like it just um there are certain practical realities of time zone and travel and whatnot, but by and large, we've it's never been a problem for us. We have investors from Silicon Valley, we have investors from Seattle, we have investors here in Vancouver, and we have investors in different places. Never been a problem. We're a BC incorporated company. We're a CCPC. Never been a problem. No pressure to move to the United States. We have a wholly owned Delaware C corp. That's a sub of the parent. Never a problem. Um, you talk about sort of these successes, and you cite D Wave, and D Wave was a success in spite of being in Canada. And here's what I mean is, D Wave never got a cent of government support until like a few years ago under SDTC. No one wants to talk about SDTC anymore, but it was an honest one. Um, and so now, you're like, oh, do you like? But when I was there in 2004 to 2005, I was like the first BD VP there, and I tried to do a lot of GR stuff, and we couldn't get any time from anybody, and not from the province, not from the government. It was regardless of what party was in power, just people were just not interested in helping. That's okay. And you look at a company like, I don't know, like General Fusion, right? You look at companies that are trying to do moonshots, they don't exactly get a lot of support. And you get a lot of lip service. And actually, there's a good audience around that are cheerleading from the sides. And that's great, right? But at the end of the day, we in Canada have this affliction where, anytime that there's a problem that's sort of like that we can't solve, we're like, the government should X, Y, Z, right? Why doesn't the government like? And it's our initial instinct. Why the government should like? No, the government shouldn't have to do all that. The government should create conditions around capital formation or taxation or various other policies, childcare or health or what or just try to make sure that real estate isn't so expensive in Vancouver that we can't bring people because they can't afford to live here. And these are just normal things. These are like ecosystem, environmental things. That's what the government should be working on. Now, you want to start, tactically investing in certain technologies in order to change behavior. I'm all for that, right? But a lot of times, you don't want the government picking winners, right? Because I mean, you don't even want VCs picking winners. It's except that's their job, right? And a big problem with that is the parliamentary democracy system that we have. Like, so let's say, for example, one party decides that they're going to create a fund and they go and invest in all of these companies. And let's say most of these companies die because it's hard, it's tech, that's just the way it is. Then you have an opposition person on the floor of whatever parliament or house or provincial legislature, like going at the government because they were stupid to fund this company. Like, come on. Like that's just wrong. But that's the climate we live in now. And it doesn't matter what party is in power and what's in opposition, they're gonna do the same stuff. So so is it surprising that a government is a bit reticent to kind of make bets? No, because there's no payoff. The payoff is like you get a company and they do really well. You can't win on that platform. You can't say, "Oh, we helped this company way back when they were seed, and now look at them." And it's like, who cares, right? The news people aren't going to care. You can't build a platform. You go door knocking and you go to constituents. Yeah, we help fund this. Like, I don't care. Like, what are you doing for my prescription drug prices? So it's a no win situation. So any government that does that has to have sort of like balls of steel because they have to realize that this is a long term bet with a lot of downside and little upside, but it's the right thing to do, right? And so when I think about that, like I'm sympathetic to anyone in government who's trying to do an innovation agenda, right? And because then you're funding this industry but not that industry. Oh, what about clean tech? Or whoa, what about life sciences? Or what about this? Instead of like it's really hard. And so I'm sympathetic to government. At the same time, I'm a taxpayer, so I want a return on investment. So but it's just a really confounding sort of situation. But there's no disadvantage to being in Canada if you're willing to get on a plane, or if you're willing to go down and knock on the doors and be aggressive, then there really isn't.
And how about bringing talent in, or I mean, are people willing to come or willing to stay in Canada? Or I mean, how are you?
Well,
Is it the magic of living in Vancouver?
so I mean, Vancouver's a nice place to live, except like when it rains, which is more than half the year. Um, I'll tell you this, un, unsurprisingly, that it's been a lot easier to recruit people from America who are there on PhD visas from other countries. I mean, that's not surprising,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's not surprising. Um, the way we look at it is, and COVID really did I think the world a favor in the sense, at least the working world, is that it got rid of this sort of this shibboleth of like you need to be all everyone needs to be in the office all the time. Certainly there are some groups and some functions where you do want to be in the same time in the same place on a regular basis. I get that, right? But there are so many functions where you really don't need to be stuck in a car in traffic for an hour there and an hour back, right? And that's 2 hours of time that like is such a waste of productivity. And then people have lives. They need to go see the doctor. They need to pick up the kids, etc. So having a hybrid work policy has really been helpful for us. And so when we made the conscious decision that we're going to continue hybrid after COVID, then we said, like, it doesn't really matter where people work. Right? I've worked in big companies where, or not even big companies where, someone's on the fifth floor, someone's on the third floor. You don't walk up and go talk to them because they're probably not at their cube. You're going to call them or you're going to message them. You probably don't even see them anywhere, right? For days. So why the hell do you need to be in the same building, right? With your group, okay, I get that, right? But largely, we've arrayed work and definitions of productivity around this assumption that we all need to be there. And I think that's stupid. Certain functions and certain organizations, certain businesses, obviously that's not true. But for us, what we found is that we're able to balance the hybrid and the remote. Therefore, we have remote workers, and that increases the pool of talent. So we don't need to bring people to Vancouver. If they want to come to Vancouver and it makes sense, we're glad to have them. And we brought Americans and people with from third party countries into Canada that were in America, and that's fine, right? And I see that as a very practical solution to a problem. But we don't need to. We're not constrained to Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal or San Francisco or Boston. I mean, well, actually, continental North America, that's our only sort of thing because time zones, right? But other than that, it's like we can fish from many, many different pools. And we find that in when you hire people, especially in functions where they can be remote, that often they're quite productive. They're a lot more productive than if you had them come into the office all the time. Not for every case. So it's very much a pick and choose. But we've not had a problem like attracting talent. The last thing I'll say is a lot of that function is based on sort of like if you're benchmarking your compensation on your local ecosystem and you're trying to get someone from a different ecosystem, you can't pay what you would pay here for someone in San Francisco, right? You need to know that. So you need to pay San Francisco salaries, even though you're a Vancouver company. And that really hurts, man. That's very painful. But that's what you got to do, right? If you want to do that, and we certainly like lost candidates where we hired machine learning researchers that come out of like top universities and top labs. They're really expensive. So the first question is like, look, what is, and they never really give you a straight answer. But then when they tell you who they're interviewing with, you're like, okay, well, there's no way we can meet that, right? So, you kind of have to have a real early talk with them and align them on the growth potential of the equity and the fact that we're doing good things instead of selling more ads and work slop. So,
So that's great. So from what I'm hearing, Handel, Handel is incredibly pragmatic. And on top of it, no government handouts. That's a Handel doesn't need no government handouts.
Oh, no, no, no. Hey, I'll take a government handout if it's offered to me. Okay, so let me nuance that. I mean, we use IRAP, we use Shred, we happily take that support, and it's necessary, right? But I guess what I'm more reacting to is sort of the attitude, like the government should come in and solve all our problems, and that's a Canadian thing, right? Because when I worked down in the valley, no one ever sat around and said, you know what, the president should like. No one ever said that, right? The governor should like change this. Like, no one ever said that. But in Canada, every time we're kind of in an industry thing, oh, the government. I'm like, oh, like we never talked about this in the valley. You just go and solve a problem, or you try and get around it. Now that said, in biotech, you got BARDA, you got NIH, you got all these funding organizations and industries where it's critical and absolutely necessary to have that support, and that support is gone now. And we're seeing what the effects are going to be. And in 2 or 3 years, when all the VCs in America kind of go like, "Where's the science and where are the labs?" Like, this is the legacy, RFK Jr. and these short-sighted policies to cut off research and choke off, people who are PIs and postdocs from different countries, right? There's going to be a real cost to America, and by extension, the entire industry. There's a place for government to do that, right? I was more railing against the attitude like the government should come in. But hey, like I'm just saying, if Mark Carney, wants to give me a lot of money to help eradicate cancer in Canada, hey, we'll do that photo op. I don't know any CEO in Canada who wouldn't. I mean, right? Regardless of what industry. So don't put words in my mouth, Lester.
Fair